good morning. Some quick instructions. If you can wear the headsets, and then once you leave, just leave it on the chair. So that's the instructions that the organizers have given me. So what are we going to talk about today? So we just have 20 minutes or so and lot to cover. So this is going to be a rapid fire, but we are going to talk about trust in AI. Right? So just before we do that, so something about me. So I lead the enterprise AI practice for LTIMindtree. Been with the company for quite some time. Very passionate of building platforms, and if you visit our booth, you'll see some of these platforms in action. So happy to be here. Moving forward, so if I look at, I'm sure many of you are already helping your customers in building GenAI solutions for their enterprises. The way I look at it, it's a combination of two axes, right? On y-axis, the platforms are maturing from enabling to collaborated, where we get into the AGI space. And on the x-axis, primarily the enterprises are trying to reinvent, trying to make sure the data is available in the proper shape, format, make sure all the guardrails are implemented, and so on and so forth. And as they are doing that, there are three patterns that are strongly emerging. One, the first pattern is about low-risk implementations of GenAI, which are primarily engineering-based use cases: code generation, code translation, modernization, all those type of use cases. And those are the use cases we saw a lot of uptake during the initial phase of GenAI adoption. As organizations started maturing, they started to figure out where the data should come from, who is the owner of the data, and stuff like that. And that's where a lot of horizontal and vertical functional use cases started getting implemented. And these use cases are like marketing automation, contact center automation, search for that matter, and many chatbots, and all our normal scenarios that we are implementing using GenAI outside of the code generation and code translation, right? And then the third, which is more transformational, that is where the real maturity of the organization comes into picture in terms of their ability to track the lineage of the data, their ability to bring in the right guardrails for responsible AI, their ability to make sure that the outcomes are validated, and so on and so forth. And that is where some of the companies have started investing in creating differentiated business capabilities, as well as primarily driving new revenue streams as well. And there are many such examples that we have. If you can visit our booth, we will be more than happy to give you those details. But end of the day, what matters is the business is looking for value. So what is the value that I'm creating for my internal and external stakeholders? And at the same time, can I create that value at speed? But what lies in between is the crux of the story in terms of how are you going to industrialize your GenAI solution. And that's all about whether it is validated. Can I trust the outcomes that are being generated through my LLM models, or the applications that I am building on top of that? Second is it governed? Like governed for fair usage, governed from a perspective of there are no biases and stuff like that. And then whether it is responsible. So all the ethical considerations, sustainability, all those aspects come as the third tower, if you will, right? So all these three in combination help us in building trust in the AI solutions that we deliver to our customers. That is where we come in. So what we have done is we created a suite of products called Alcazar. So Alcazar primarily has completely built on Databricks platform, and it has two broad components. So one component, primarily the Alcazar.data, that helps you in formulating all your modernization, data pipelines, and that side of the world, and it also helps in guaranteeing the FinOps operations, observability side of things. On the right hand side, what you see is Alcazar.ai. So Alcazar.ai was specifically made with GenAI in mind, right? So how do I build a fabric for organization which brings in the data, structured, unstructured knowledge graphs together into a common element where we can track the entire ownership and lineage of the data as well. Building on top of that, primarily we have brought in the trust and responsible AI interventions, and I will talk more about it in a bit. And then on top of that, the pre-built navigators. So we call navigators are like business applications that we build using this platform, right? So I will do a double click into what does the Alcazar.ai from a responsible and trust perspective means. So primarily we work with OAP's top 10 LLM framework, and then many of the compliance guidelines that are out there in the market. We have built on top of that, and we have created a set of almost 500 odd parameters, which are kind of distributed across various elements. So first is how do you actually help customers in selecting the right model based on what the task that it has to perform. Say, for example, summarization, where you would probably use Llama, or it is question and answers, where you use GPT, and so on and so forth. So there is a element of selection of the models from that perspective. Then the context window, how current is the model, and so on and so forth. So that's from a model adoption perspective. Then as we get into the actual implementation of the model and usage of the model, that's where the input and output, prompt validation, prompt governance comes into picture. And on the right hand side, how do you detect the vulnerabilities? How do you make it more responsible by bringing in the guardrails? We have a set of parameters where you can do automated red teaming and validating your models and so on and so forth, right? So once we do this, it brings together through the Databricks ecosystem. So at the top you see all the apps. So we have more than 50 odd apps that we have built on the platform, which then leverage many of the interventions or the smaller modules of Alcazar.ai that bring to bear. So if you look at it, the dynamic model selection. So what dynamic model selection does is, it's an AI model which we have brought in between when we ask a query. So depending on the query, it will decide whether a small language model or a general purpose model or a specific model has to be invoked, right? Say for example, if someone is asking about who is the president of North America, then it will go to GPT. But if someone is asking for generate a code using Python, then it will go to star coder. Or if there are any specific other questions, it will go to a different model. So there is a intelligence built for that. Similarly, the model evaluation and the pre and the post evaluation does a lot of testing on the models and the applications itself. Then there are vulnerability checks. We do almost 100+ checks and give up a nice dashboard. You'll be able to see in our booth as well as a demo. Then the model quality assurance, where we check based on the ground truth, the data that is available with the output that the model generates, compare it and make sure that the inferences as well as the results that are generated are relevant for that particular question. And then obviously from an evaluation perspective, the biases, toxicity, everything is done through the pre and post evaluation modules that we have within Alcazar.ai. Now, if I have to look at how do we make it real through a real world example, I'll take an example of one of the navigator apps that we have, the Fin Alerts, which primarily is for corporate lending. So your risk officers, your portfolio managers, they would at any point of time want to know what is the risk profile of my customers. Will they be able to pay the installments on their loan? And it depends on a lot of internal and external factors as well. So we look at the operational data, we look at a lot of external data as well in terms of the news articles. We look at their company profile and stuff like that. That is where the LLM comes into, the Gen AI comes into picture. And then it's a combination of a lot of traditional models for probability prediction and other things, and then the Gen AI based models for the unstructured data processing that we do, right? So from this point, basically these are there is a lot of things that happen outside of this, but just to put it simplistically, there are 3 primary steps, right? So one is the indexing step, where we ingest a lot of the documents, the unstructured documents, as well as we leverage a lot of the call-based audio recordings between the relationship manager and the customers. So primarily we extract text from these recordings, and then we create embeddings. So primarily for creating embeddings, we are using Databricks BGE model, which then gets stored into the vector store on Databricks. So that's kind of the first step, where you are kind of preparing your data, building the context, storing those vectors, so that the responses that are generated are more contextual to the question that they are asked. The second step is more in terms of the query processing itself. So once the query comes in, either through a chat application or any of the other applications which invoke it through API, it first passes through a guardrail, right? So what that guardrail checks is all the vulnerabilities, all the biases. There are 2 types of guardrails that we have integrated, and we are using the NVIDIA NEMO framework for that. So there is structured guardrails, where you can just click and say that I want to check for PII data, I want to check for personal information and other things. And then there is free flow guardrails. So if I want to restrict the application from responding to questions like, can you give me a detailed architecture of Alcazar? So I can just type in the free flow guardrail in our framework, and it will restrict it there and there itself, right? So those are the input checks that that happen as soon as we receive the query. Once that is done, the query goes to the prompt processing engine, which primarily sends it to the retriever. The retriever kind of refers back to the vectors that have been created. Then it does the similarity search, the re-ranking of the results. So for re-ranking, we are using Cohere, and then it kind of compresses the context and then sends it to the response engine, right? So that's where the third process comes into picture, where we start responding to the query that has been asked, right? So from when it comes to the response, there are first 2 things that happen is, first is we check whether similar responses have been done in the past. So we use semantic caching layer. So we have created our own semantic cache, where all the responses, and it obviously has a life cycle, but all the responses are stored in a semantic cache. So any question which is similar nature, so that first refers to the semantic cache, and then it is directly responded from there. Once it passes that particular layer, then we go to the dynamic model selection. That is where, depending on the task, depending on the context, it will invoke one or the other model it has to. In this particular case, we have purely gone with the DBRX. We are not using any other model, but that intervention exists from an Alcazar.ai perspective, which can help you in invoking any of the models that you want to. Once that is done and the output is generated, there are 2 things that happen. One is, even the output has to be evaluated in terms of the whether there are any PII data that is getting ingested into the output, or it is hallucinating and stuff like that. So those output checks happen at one side, and the responses are also sent as a feedback, so that any other the new responses can then be refined or cached from that perspective. So once all this happens, we integrate all the responses and then send it back to the API or the chat application that would primarily use these responses, right? So that's kind of in a nutshell what happens from building the trust point of view. Bringing in the guardrails, bringing in the vulnerability checks, bringing in all the elements from the enterprise data perspective, so that we can improve the accuracy of the result, and then we apply all RAG, advanced RAG. We have not used a GraphDB in this to build a knowledge fabric as such, but that can also be plugged into this solution to create a holistic, trustworthy response from any of your applications, right? So that. So that's where we are. So build trust in AI with Alcazar.ai, and you can visit our booth, booth number 90. We'll be more than happy to give you a detailed demo of the solution and all the guardrails that we have built. Happy to take any questions at this point, or we can meet up at the booth as well. Yeah. Thank you very much.